Good evening, everyone. My name is Jordan Carter. I'm a curator and co-ed of the curatorial department here at DIA. I'm really excited to be hosting here at DIA the New York launch of the first print issue of e-flux Index, featuring presentations by e-flux contributor Christian Nyampeta and e-flux editor Serubiri Moses and Juliana Halpert. Before we start the program, I also want to thank my colleagues who made this evening possible, including Max Tanone, Kimberly Golding, Matilde Guidelli-Guidi, and Umberto Moro. And I will now just pass the mic over to e-flux founding editor Anton Vidokle, who will further introduce tonight's program. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for hosting us. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you all so much for coming on such a hot day. Maybe before we start with the presentations, I wanted to make a quick introduction, maybe to talk a little bit about the history of e-flux, like a kind of a very condensed version of e-flux history in 3 minutes or less. Because in a way, like, we are in New York, and we started in New York, and we've always been in New York, but sometimes I have a feeling that in New York people think that we're like in Europe, that we're based in Germany, in Berlin or something like that, that we're actually not here, yeah? So maybe just very briefly, you know, e-flux started by an accident, a complete accident. It was in 1998. I was collaborating with a couple of friends who were unemployed curators, and we had this idea to try to treat the city as a, you know, as a space for exhibitions, as a space for art, and they didn't need to take place in museums, they didn't need to take place in galleries, they could be anywhere, in the parking lot, in a public park, outside the city, in the forest, you know, and including one project that we did in a hotel room in the Chinatown Holiday Inn. This was in November of 1998, and we had very little money. We basically just had enough to rent a room for one night, but no budget, of course, to print invitations or posters or promote this show in any way. And the show was a little bit peculiar. It basically, as you know, in hotels, usually you check in at 3 o'clock, and then you have to check out at 11 o'clock the next morning. So we basically had a few hours after check-in to install the works, and the works were really special. It was several videos by Michel Oder, who is one of the pioneers of video art. It was a very beautiful sound installation by Carsten Nicolai, a German artist and a composer, who is also known as Alvanotto, and we still work with him quite closely on many different projects. There was a really interesting installation by a Japanese artist, Tomoko Takahashi, who made a kind of like small scatter installations that looked like a hurricane exploded in just a part of your apartment, and that was like a kind of a total scatter, but at the same time it had like the most meticulous order of relations between all of the strange objects. And there was a kind of a very strange painting by a New York painter, Peter Scott. And what happened was basically the show was supposed to open at 10 o'clock in the evening and continue until 10 o'clock the following morning, like 12 hours overnight. And because we didn't have any ways to promote it, at the time, I just had my first email account, which was with Hotmail. A friend of mine opened it for me. And I thought, well, maybe we should just email the press releases to the few friends that already had email addresses at that time. And of course, this was in 1998, very few people. Email was just becoming popular, yeah? So maybe there were 20 or 30 friends that we sent these press releases to. And something completely unexpected happened. Hundreds and hundreds of people tried to come to this hotel room in the middle of the night. And we kind of got really scared that we would get kicked out by the hotel because it's a truly strange thing, yeah? So we went to the desk and we lied. We told them that we were actually auditioning for a film, and the film will be about the art world, so people will be dressed in black, and please, like, don't mind them, just let them go to the room. So that completely convinced the hotel. They were totally cool with that, which shows how much, you know, power film industry has in the city, that if you say that you're making a movie, you can basically do just about anything. But in the morning, the hotel staff started knocking on the door, But it turned out that they came not to kick us out, but they wanted to be auditioned to be in this film, yeah? So in a way, our lie was exposed, but it was already 10 in the morning, the show was over, so we kind of got away with it. But afterwards, I started thinking that, you know, it was something so kind of seemed like almost miraculous what happened, and that maybe we should develop it into a platform that others could also use, other curators, artists, small galleries that don't have, you know, promotional budget and things like that. And then it sort of basically took off by itself, and before we knew it, there were tens of thousands of readers all over the world. And at a certain point, I kind of realized that they were not only interested in, you know, receiving information about exhibitions at other places, that they were also interested in some kind of content from e-flux. And that, in a sense, maybe is the origin of our interest in publishing, because we tried to create a certain kind of content that would, and to try to use the internet as a kind of a publishing platform, essentially. But paradoxically, the very first project we did was a kind of an insertion in a print magazine. At the time, Parquet magazine was quite popular, and the publisher was very friendly to me and e-flux, and he kind of invited us to do something within the space of Parquet magazine, and we invited another artist based in New York, Rob Pruitt, to do a special project, which basically was a love letter that, like a facsimile of a love letter that he wrote to his boyfriend Jonathan, which was inserted in Parquet as though somebody accidentally forgot, you know, a love letter inserted in a book. Yeah, I would really love to have a copy of this project. This was 25 years ago, and it's quite a pity that I actually don't have it. Yeah, but so. It's quite interesting that our very first sort of art project that we kind of produced and was actually a piece of print publishing, yeah? And of course, now we're starting with this index 25 years later, which seems completely counterintuitive, because as you all know, all of the other publications are switching to digital format. You know, print feels obsolete, too expensive, impossible to distribute, to circulate. You know, but somehow e-flux has always been very, well, counterintuitive, or maybe very intuitive, I don't know, but like the salmon, we always try to swim against the current. So we feel that this is like a really good time to actually produce a print publication, because they're a print periodical, a print journal, because they're kind of vanishing, yeah? And, you know, over the years, you know, basically our really serious kind of investment in publishing and you know, commissioning content and publishing content kind of started with e-flux journal, although we've done a number of books before and a few publications projects, but the really sort of serious commitment to publishing regularly was a kind of a result of a project that we did in New York at the New Museum called Night School. It was a kind of an experimental school that we were invited by Unji Ju, who was the curator of education there, to organize it at the New Museum for a year. And it was basically, I think, monthly seminars, about 11 or 12 of them, involving many different artists, curators, philosophers, writers, and so forth. And one of the people that was kind of very central to this project was actually the artist Liam Gillick. And in the very beginning, he suggested that we should start a publication, you know, a kind of a print publication as part of this night school, but it would be kind of something not designed, not printed by a professional printer, you know, something that could be handwritten, something that could be reproduced on a Xerox copier, that would basically publish very urgent, almost like position papers, yeah? New Museum actually decided that they're not interested in publishing, even though that institution has a very interesting history of publishing, and they publish some of the most important, you know, theoretical anthologies in the 80s and many other things. But by the time when we were doing this project there, which was around 2008, somehow they were much more interested in exhibitions and things like that, and much less in publications. So we actually didn't do it. But one of the participants in the night school was Kuan Wood, and one day we were having lunch, and somehow we decided that we are going to start a journal online. And Brian at the time was working as an editor of the Tribeca Film Festival website. So he basically offered to quit his job and do this crazy thing with me and Julieta. And yes, and since then, of course, we added many other publishing platforms on e-flux. For example, e-flux criticism became something quite important for us. e-flux criticism mainly publishes reviews of exhibitions in museums and galleries all over the world. It's edited by Ben Eastham, and then during the pandemic we started a new platform which is called e-flux Notes, mainly because e-flux Journal is a kind of a periodical, so sometimes it's a bit difficult to react rapidly to very important, urgent topics and things that are happening, around us all the time. And so we kind of wanted something where we could publish maybe shorter pieces more spontaneously without a long-term, publishing schedule and things like that. Another very important part of e-flux publishing is e-flux education, which is something that we started jointly with Art Forum quite a long time ago, which basically publishes text on education and specifically art education, because this is such an important topic. It's completely generative and transformative in terms of educating new generations of artists and really transforming what art looks like and what are the ideas in art, right? And also it does publish interviews with educators and artists, and it tries to kind of address this entire very, very vast and important field. We also several years ago started e-flux Architecture, which basically is yet another structure. It's a kind of a collaborative publication. The way it works is we collaborate with various architectural institutions, sometimes schools of architecture, sometimes museums or centers for architecture, and jointly generate thematic projects and commission texts by theorists of architecture, by practicing architects. To date, we've probably published close to 60 or maybe even more projects on all of the different topics in contemporary architectural theory and practice. And most recently, we just added yet another little publication to our sort of portfolio of publications, if one should use that word, which is called Film Notes, which specifically focuses on writing on film, not necessarily reviews of films or that kind of writing, but more connected to film history, film theory, and also experimental writings by artists who work with film as a medium. So this is something that we literally started just a few weeks ago. It's a baby, and so e-flux Index combines all of this. But what is very important for us is really to explore the connections, thematic overlaps, thematic drifts between all of this different content that we publish, because even though the topics may be quite different, from architecture to film to art education, but we've noticed that there is so many overlaps and there is such a conversation between all of the different authors that contribute to these publications and the kind of concerns they have. So e-flux Index, which is right here, it's quite large, it's like a phone directory almost, it combines all of this content that is commissioned and published within a 2-month period. There will be 5 issues per year, which is probably a total overkill, but there is a kind of no way for us to do it otherwise, because otherwise each book would be like 1,000 pages long, And the editor of e-flux Index, or we call this position meta-editor, because it's not somebody who commissions and edits specific texts, because they already exist and they've already been published in other platforms. But his task is specifically to find commonalities, to find thematic connections, and basically resequence all of this content in one book. And the other maybe really important reason for us to do it is, after working with internet for 25 years, I'm just starting to realize how incredibly ephemeral it is. It changes every day. There is almost no way to archive it, and it's not a document because it continually changes. Yeah, not only changes that you make by changing images or words, but the code that runs it changes. Yeah, and if you don't update it, if you don't install the new version of some software that is essential, right? It stops working and it deteriorates, and in a few years it becomes unintelligible. So in a way, it seems like internet is so all-encompassing and so powerful and so shaping in our life, but at the same time, it's one of the most ephemeral, one of the most impermanent things I've ever worked with. Yeah. So for us, it also became quite important the idea, the concern with preservation of all of this content and archiving qualities of all of it, and just to be able to have a document that does not change. Or of course, everything changes, but let's say it changes a little bit more slowly than the kind of incredibly rapid transformation of things online. Yeah. So I spoke for more than 3 minutes, I'm afraid. Maybe it's time to pass the microphone to Brian Kuan Wood and Julieta Aranda, who are editors of e-flux Journal. Please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to Dia for having us here. And Anton's trip down memory lane is also making me a bit nostalgic. I remembered that I worked as a guard at Dia for a short time 25 years ago across the street at 532. And so it's really kind of special to be presenting our work for a very short time here with you.
Yeah, like again, listening to the story of e-flux makes nostalgic, absolutely. What I was thinking right now is that 22 years ago, I was quite young, and I had an image of myself, that moving around, traveling the world, doing tons of things, and never imagined that I would be the kind of person that keeps the same job for 25 years. I thought it was like a boomer thing, but surprise, here I am. So I think that just to take it from where Anton was speaking about, like the moment when e-flux started to produce content, I think the first thing that we were doing were art projects. And, we collaborated with Hansel Recoveries. We did a book called The Next Documenta Should Be Curated by an Artist. We did some of our own projects, which were very concerned with circulation and distribution, which was something that was really at the core of e-flux back then. And I think after one of those projects, which was e-flux video rental, we made a book for the project, and something sparked, and like the need for, instead of depending on other texts in order to justify what we were doing, or in order to find a theoretical framework for our work, since it did not exist entirely, and it was a bit annoying to have to go back to the volume 2 of the Capital to find text on circulation. We decided, or it came kind of like spontaneous generation, the journal. And again, I don't know what kind of time frame we had in mind, but now it's been 146 issues of the journal. And I think that when you have done something 146 times, it means quite something. Something interesting is that, of course, we publish a lot, as Anton was saying, but the journal itself is a thickness that we are familiar with, because we have done it in this kind of like samizdat's type model in photocopies. And like the thickness is always something quite manageable that you can roll up. And all of a sudden, to see the the sheer thickness of the of the content that we put out every couple of months. It just also, allows me personally to see how much e-flux has developed in the past 20 years. It's yours now, Brian.
I remember also this lunch. I think it was a bit less organic than you described, Anton, where you were thinking about starting a new art publication, and I told you that's a terrible idea. Do we really need another one? But as a strange experiment, we sort of tried it, and there were, I think, at least a couple of things that were very clear at the time that turned out to be very, very significant shifts in the kind of formation of the art world. One of them was the proliferation of the English language, where many, many people were willing to read and to engage with English language content. I had just moved to New York from Cairo. Also, I had been actually after my job across the street at 532, I basically moved to Cairo, had just moved back, was involved with the art scene there. We all have our relations to different parts of the world, whether through art, through family, through elected or biological affinities. And all of these relations were starting to form little pockets of very, very interesting discussion. And they were also starting to look at each other. And we wanted to see what was going on there. The other aspect, the other kind of very significant change at the time was something that was the beginning of something that maybe was starting to be called or came to be called artistic research or research-heavy practices, which only kind of deepened with the deepening influence of the internet and the access to information. This created a certain kind of an extremely informed, an extremely language-based, and extremely kind of argumentative artist, especially with younger artists. And you could say this has continued up until today. But it also means that a lot of critical thinking and critical writing was starting to come from artists themselves, and we wanted to also deal with this kind of slightly amateurish, sometimes accidentally amateurishly overperforming, even surpassing academic forms of research, but still kind of free and based within artistic practice. And we wanted to kind of engage with this as a new form of artistic thinking.
I think we have been publishing artists from the very first issue. I remember quite distinctly Rax Media Collective, because there was a text that I really adore in that one. Something that is peculiar to the journal is that how much do we use external editors. So we do thematic issues. Actually, right now I want to give a shout out to Mackenzie Work, because the current issue of the journal is the 20 years of Hackers Manifesto.
Mackenzie Work, who is with us in the audience today. Yeah. Hey, Mackenzie. Hey. Yeah, not just a shout out to like it.
But it's kind of fantastic to see also how many of the texts that we have published have become really important in the formation, in the curriculum of arts, and how much they are used as in the syllabus of people now. I teach quite a bit, and it has been quite very interesting to see how much our texts manifest in the reading list of other people in academia. So it really feels that we managed to turn the wheel in terms of what kind of importance and value artistic thinking has.
it's a terrifying thought always that many of these texts, which began as complete experiments, have become canonical, and I hope that e-flux Index and e-flux's publishing can also continue this more, well, amateurish is not always the right word, but this more experimental and extremely open-ended form of inquiry that goes into a lot of the writing, especially because, also now e-flux Journal publishes a number of academics, even very accomplished academics. It's very wonderful. They're very smart, but and often I think they gravitate towards e-flux Journal and e-flux in general, also for its kind of hosting of more experimental thinking, and it's great. But I think it's really special to be always founded in the more kind of searching and curious and very tenacious thinking of artists.
Yeah, I think that kind of experimental aspect of our publications is what also has kept us relevant, I would say, and capable of engaging with people of generations other than ours as we go forward. So I hope that Index continues that. I would like to see it in libraries. And I guess with that, we should be passing on the mic to Christian.
No, actually, I believe we are actually passing the mic to our contributing editor, Serubiri Moses. Thanks so much.
Hi everyone. Thank you. So I'll just be the first to read from the book. Yeah, I just want to say that, like the others have said, I think it is an incredible honor to be part of this publication, and also part of this this organization, e-flux, which is read far more widely than than even I think because I think coming up as a, shall I say, quasi non-academic creative practitioner in Uganda who had dropped out of software engineering school. This was what we read to inform us about art. And so it has continued to be that the fact that today that I'm now, one of the contributing editors, for me makes me very proud. So thank you for having me as part of it. I'm going to read from a text that I co-wrote with Nkule Mabaso, who is a PhD student in Sweden and also a South African artist and curator. It's a kind of text that we co-wrote, I think, over a long period of time. Maybe it was like 3 years or something like this. And the reason is that we were just having conversations that were very slow. We would gather with our friends over WhatsApp or over Zoom or whatever it is and just kind of talk, And so this is the combination of it. I'm just going to read the kind of introduction to it so that I don't bore you. So it's called Cite, Cite, Cite. Notes on citation as a gesture of reproducibility. Which citational practices? Citational practices have come under review in several recent settings. In 2020, Annabelle L. Kim edited an issue of Diacritics called The Politics of Citation. Curator Legacy Russell delivered her lecture on footnotes in 2021. in Paris Journal's 2023 issue, Citation, editors Catherine Clasto and Marie-Louise Richards facilitated a discussion that went beyond the binary of citing and plagiarizing. They deployed various artistic and cultural practices to examine the motivations behind the implications of citational decisions. Beyond the academicism of citational mobility, recent efforts have been made to think through citation within the context of exhibitions, such as in scholar Lucy Steed's writing on, quote, restaging historical exhibitions, end quote. Contemporary citational projects have also taken the form of audio broadcasts and exhibition making centered on spacious quotation of impactful written work. For example, Chimurenga, an arts organization and publisher in Cape Town, aired a radio program last July celebrating what would have been the 85th birthday of legendary South African and Botswanan writer Bessie Head. Similarly, curators Nontobeko Ntombela and Portia Malachi used Head's 1968 novel When Rain Clouds Gather as a title and framework for their year-long exhibition at the Norval Foundation in Cape Town, which traced a history of Black women in South African art from 1940 to 2000. In addition to novels, short stories, Head also wrote art criticism. In 1963, she reviewed an exhibition of modern painter Gladys Mukutlandlu for the New African periodical. According to reviews like Head's, as well as eyewitness accounts, the exhibition positioned Mukutlandlu at the very heart of the history of Black women in South African art. So I'll stop there. And just to say that, this text it's a really funny text because, like, when you've met with people over a period of 3 years and you've done, gatherings, like, you've, for example, we had a panel in a conference actually discussing these same kind of issues. Like, it ceases to matter what you're actually writing, and the conversation cannot be contained in this. And so we are still having these conversations. Some of them I think are impossible to have because it's like they, first of all, it's impossible to resolve a conversation of this kind. Okay, so yeah, that was my reading, and now I just want to maybe talk a little bit about the upcoming issue that we're editing. So I have been working with e-flux now more than a year, and I have been working as a contributing editor. And yes, I've been advocating for a lot of artists to appear in the journal. To my own embarrassment, but also the embarrassment of my co-editors. And I think that it's been a quite interesting journey to publish a lot of artists' voices, but of course now we're working towards an issue. And this issue is about the late curator Okwi Enwezor. I don't know if you know this gentleman. Yeah, we do? Okay, great. He was a Nigerian-American curator who was predominantly based here in the United States. He passed away only a few years ago. He was born in Nigeria in the 1960s. And he, like many migrants, migrated to the US for educational reasons. He came to study political science at a college in New Jersey. And, I think following there shortly, he spent a lot of time in museums. Pardon me. He went to see the show Primitivism at MoMA in 1984, which was very impactful on him and his thinking. And also, he just became in touch with a lot of artists in the Bowery. I mean, he for a time wrote poetry and was, reading his poetry on the Bowery. But I think the issue is less to do with this kind of notion of biography. I think there has been an issue already edited by NKA Journal, which is the journal that he founded, which still exists and is published by Duke Press. They did a special issue on Okwi and Wezor, I believe it was in 2021, and basically it was mostly biographical. Lots of tributes from people like Steve McQueen, and a lot of artists who he worked with, Lynette Yadom Boyache, Ellen Gallagher, a number of artists, contributed. And so this issue is less of a tribute to Okwi and more of an engagement with his ideas. For example, one of the ideas that he created, and I think a lot of people cite, is the post-colonial constellation, which is an idea that is formulated in dialogue with Walter Benjamin, right? Whose text on the philosophy and the history. His text on the philosophy of history is very influential to artists also in contemporary art, like John Akomfra and Black Audio Collective, etc. And so I think concepts like post-colonial constellation will be very crucial to the issue that we're producing. I think also understanding how to think of Okwi in time, I think also while we're having a conversation with Anton, I think it became clear that there really hasn't been a kind of an undertaking that tries to study and contextualize this curator's work, which is very true. I think the purpose of doing something like this is to draw more of a context and understanding. We don't claim, at least I don't claim, to have familiarity with Okwi. There is no familial relationship that I have to Enwezor. I'm doing it as someone who was born in Uganda, who, among those who saw Okwi as somebody whose work was resonant and influential, primarily because he sought out artists working in that part of the world, right? And so it wasn't the other way around, no. So I think this is just following those little traces and footprints, and at the same time trying to do the work of remembering, but also at the same time, shall I say, clarifying what work has been done in the past. And on my way here, I was speaking to someone, and we were talking about how most likely in the next 10 years, every curator will be required to have a PhD in order for them to work in an institution. Okwi did not even have a degree in art history. He studied political science, that was his major. And he used political science, of course, to theorize. So I think this means that generation of curators is now kind of gone. So how can we create some sort of record of what work that they produced? So this is what I'm working on, and now I'll pass the microphone on to Christian.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you for this kind of invitation on this solstice day of the year 2024. I have prepared some notes which are much longer than the time I have, so I will play forward and maybe backwards, much like you would do watching a movie. So the underlying question of the 2018 article published in the index we're celebrating here is why does knowledge not prevent violence? Why does knowledge not dispel misery? And this contradiction embodies one of the challenges facing current and future generations of philosophers, educators, artists, policymakers, and other civic bodies. How and where to bury the ghosts of defunct knowledges and the ghosts of its victims. Some citing from that same article, or paraphrasing rather. And in the past years, I've learned that violence as such is not really a subject of philosophy, which is to say, the knowledge of knowledges, at least not directly. The history of philosophy has considered humanity to be standing at the top of the evolutionary or creation ladder, walking upright, head and reason high. But obviously, humanity should also have been looked at in its other circumstances as well, sitting down, hunched over, and self-obsessed. So in a way, the African Film Institute, which is what I'm actually talking about today, is part of a collective effort involving many cooperations and collaborations, serving to offer emotional, spiritual, religious, and intellectual relief from the shared pressures, dangers, and precarities created by the modern world, through learning with and alongside African ways of rehoming the world, shared across lands, waters, forests, cities, mountains, skies, languages, cultures, times, and outlooks. The films are alibis, as Anton Vidokle would say, which probe new possibilities of existing by animating records, images, songs, scripts, words, stories, and other forms of expression that expand what and where knowledge is and what it can do. So the African Film Institute at e-flux here in New York, in Brooklyn, it aims to create a home and a place of intimacy with African cinema through developing gradually and organically a viewing program animated by fellowships, a growing library, an active writer's room, and an expanding catalogue of recorded dialogues. Very ambitious. The Institute will maintain a presence of African cinema, in fact it already does, through cultural critique, social analysis, and in particular a convivial scholarship grounded in fellowship and anchored in mutuality and affiliation with near and distant places and times, rendered again through the medium of the moving image in the plural idiom of African expressions. The Institute wishes to supplement existing public encounters with African cinema in New York, most of which take place at screenings presented either as part of occasional and temporary exhibitions or at esteemed and renowned film festivals such as the African Film Festival or Congo in Harlem. But because such outlets are temporary, their offerings are only limited to a number of days each year, leaving publics and students of African cinema underserved for the remainder of the time. To this end, the African Film Institute, in a way, continues the e-flux night school. It is an evening school that draws from the visual cultures that view cinema as an evening school, a popular information system in the service of education, aesthetic experience, and public dissemination, employing a methodology concerning the use of cinema's collective production, and investing in viewing methods informed by different uses of time, visual and textual histories, social struggles and hopes, in mutuality with their own localities and the world at large. To set up an institute of African cinema anywhere is to make a commitment of daunting magnitude. Setting up one in New York is no different, and the African Film Institute will continue in some ways, but also break in some others, with a number of intertwined but distinct burning questions of today. These include issues of boundaries, race, gender, memory and difference, education, labor and migration, conflict and economy, culture and ecology, and governance. The program at the African Film Institute reflects these issues while also highlighting new transitions, rhythms, and orientations as they emerge through video, films, and music by means of live technologies and practical imaginaries that include dance, rest, lyricism, and more. Along the way, the African Film Institute wishes to operate through conviviality, fellowship, and affiliation, amplified by screenings, the library, the writing room, and the recordings. Maybe I can speak a little bit about the past program, and then also what is to come. So I would like to reflect a little bit on the initial, the inaugural program, or the pre-program, in fact, that was called A Song About Love, which was a festive evening at e-flux in Brooklyn in 2023, composed of visual poems sourced through the community of collaborators and supporters. These include colleagues in Lubumbashi, at Centre d'Art in Cape Town, at Chimurenga, in Kigali, at Espace, and elsewhere. And the evening sought to present music videos as a serious category of cinematic force with a transgeographic playlist within the genre that relates to the African life worlds, traversing through its contemporary forms and journeying into sonic cultures described within and beyond Afrofuturisms. Works that, as anthropologist Natasha Nsabimana and scholar Adam Getachew describe, speculate about the futures by imagining realistic, mythical, and fantastical potentials out of the conundrums of the present. The evening suggested a number of tenets and pedagogical outlooks to be explored over the years by means of the trans-institutional practices that lie at the heart of the African Film Institute. These include tensions caused by the competing commercial interests, social values, and global norms of the West, the East, and Africa, the tracing of histories, genealogies, and knowledge within the absences and breaks, but also overcomings, such as that expressed through the medium of film and film festivals, the place of religion, the sacred, the profane in culture and society, political engagement and the freedom not to engage politically, gender-based violence, regional alliances, state and institutional patronage in cinema, mobility, displacement, borders and exile, nation, states, land and territory, earths, waters, ecologies and extractions, and so on. Maybe I would like to speak more about what is forthcoming. And so at the currently the fellow is Natasha Nsabimana, who runs a film series that invites filmmakers, artists, and scholars for a meditation and conversations around African cinema. It unfolds so far at the e-flux screening room over the course of 12 months. And what does the questions addressed are: what does the formulation evoke for us today? What is it worth holding on to speak of African cinema? For whom? The series it's comprised of viewings and sometimes followed by conversations. And so far, the film has featured filmmaker Amelia Umuhire with a film and a radio play. And next week, in fact, if you can make it, there will be a screening of Sankofa, followed by a conversation with Mary Gerima, the filmmaker, and scholar and performance practitioner Honey Crawford. Forthcoming are also the studies, or a long-term study of the past and future of Nigerian cinema, which has seen a lot of changes and transformation that has the fellow Dika Ofuama has identified in 3 phases, reflecting the talents and innovations of Nigerian film industry. The first phase being having started in 1992 with the industry's first commercial hit, Living in Bondage, and its success charting a course of family dramas replete with moral lessons and filmed directly onto VHS. So the films that came after it, despite being made on a minuscule budget, quickly rose to popularity and found love and home not just in Nigeria but around Africa and elsewhere. Surprisingly, there's very little thinking and theorization around these films and what they mean today, and so a lot of interests that I hope to carry forth, perhaps in relation to publishing too, is where these forms sit, and beyond only cinema, but also within the life as it experienced in different parts of the world. Another program is around After Africa, which engages, to go back to the start, with the question of when Africans die, for example in Europe, where do their spirits wander? Which spaces do they haunt? So it's a kind of it's hard to describe exactly if it's futuristic or not. And then another interest, of course, is around something you could call black screens, which engages more with films made by Africans in America. I have more things to say, but I'm sure other people do too. So if you allow me, I would love to pause here.
I'm Juliana Halpert. I'm the editor of e-flux Education. I became the editor about 9 months ago, and one of the first things I did, of course, was go through everything that has already been published, which is quite extensive, and I, of course, want to give a lot of credit to the former editor, Tyler Considine, and the education announcements curator, Sloan Solly, who's here in the audience, and their knowledge of art institutions and art schools and art education in general across the world is, I think, peerless. Sloan has been really, really essential in helping me familiarize myself, but I was really glad to hear some early e-flux lore earlier today, because when I was going through a lot of the earlier features on e-flux Education, I came across one that I had read and reread, and I had somehow forgotten about since that time. And I think it was about 5 years ago. I was living in my parents' house in Vermont, and I really wanted to go to art school in Los Angeles. And I finally accepted to go to an MFA program at Art Center College of Design. And all I really had to go on, I'd visited once, maybe for an hour, some guy showed me around, and I read everything I could on their website. Otherwise, I had no information about this school other than that I liked its professors, and they'd kind of let me do what I wanted. And I found this article by Andrew Berardini, who was a writer I was familiar with, on e-flux education. And it was really in-depth, it felt honest, and it contextualized the school within this network and the history of art schools in Los Angeles, which is very rich, complicated, and varied. And right at the top of the article, I saw an image of the professor who really drew me to that school, who was Stan Douglas, the artist, whom I really worshipped at the time. And next to him was Jason Smith, who became one of my most cherished mentors and professors, and whom actually has a piece in this issue of Index on automation. He's a really wonderful writer. So it's just really remarkable to me that I've found myself here and getting to work on this project that has impacted me so deeply, and I hope can also impact other students, but beyond just being a resource for students or a guide, I think that it also provides really, really integral and unique coverage of art programs all around the world. I mean, I don't think that this really exists in this form in any other sort of outlet or publication, and it's a really, really big privilege and an obligation to make sure that we are providing transparent and engaging coverage about arts education. It's a really, especially right now, I think it's a very, very fertile and maybe volatile area. And there are so many questions to be asked and so many answers to hopefully provide. It's also a bit of a horse of a different color, because it's not quite criticism. You know, we're not just writing reviews of schools, but it's also not just sort of straightforward reportage either. It's somewhere in the middle, and we are engaging critically, and at least that's the goal, but also we really want to share information about schools or programs that otherwise readers might not encounter, and that might also draw people to e-flux and all of the many other incredible sections that e-flux has too, because they really are so interrelated. And I mean, there are so many incredible pieces about MFA programs all around the world, but I also want to stress that I think e-flux education really focuses on a lot of alternative programs that aren't necessarily affiliated with large institutions. And there are so many of these popping up right now, and I mean, have been also for a while, but it just seems very, very active right now. And I think it's an important thing to outline and articulate and to share with other people, so that, like Moses was saying, maybe certain students or scholars who don't have extremely traditional graduate educations can see that there are other ways to do this. And a piece I was really proud of that we published recently was by the writer and curator Denny Mora, and he covered the new art school modality, which just started in Chicago. And it's a completely independent school. I think it's free. I don't even know if it's necessarily like accredited in the highly formal way, but it was started by this wonderful scholar named Rami Crawford. And it's really born out of the legacy of the Chicago Black Arts Movement and the Black Panthers and Black Power and their extreme commitment to, I guess, arts and culture in the city and beyond. And a lot of the artists from the Black Arts Movement in Chicago in the 70s became teachers in this program. And they studied Festac 77, which was an incredible sort of Pan-Africanist festival that convened in Lagos, Nigeria in 1977. I think like delegates from 50 countries in Africa and maybe 50,000 people attended. And this whole term was devoted to studying the legacy of this festival, this idea of Pan-Africanism and African and Black culture. And then at the end of the term, as Denny recounted in his piece, a lot of the students, they all put together a project and got to present it at the Lagos Biennial at the end of the year, which I just thought was a really sort of nice arc and a trajectory and a model for really sort of constructive and non-exclusive education. It's just I really, really hope that people see that. And we also recently covered, the writer Karina Apostol covered a very small but very sort of like fledgling and vanguard program in Santander, Spain, which is a small, very small city in northern Spain that I guess it's a financial capital. It's where Banco Santander is, but there isn't that much culture there besides a few sort of generously funded institutions. But it's really, this little program is making this new model of art education that has never existed in the region. And as Karina Apostol states it, I think that art education in most of Spain has been very traditional, very conservative, very skills-based, and here they are sort of going around on boats, doing interesting movement workshops, and finding really incredibly novel ways to integrate social practice into their curriculum. And they had like incredible teachers from all around the world visit and do online meetings too. So it's sort of expanding ever outward. But I guess I could also provide a preview of what's coming. I really, well, I should also mention that we do surveys with professors, which are basically just pretty long, in-depth interviews, and they really give professors an opportunity to speak about their teaching practice in ways that I often think that they don't quite have an opportunity to do so. And it often sort of waxes towards their art practices as well, and how teaching and art practice and art production are just so inextricable, so often. And recently we just published an interview with the professor Phil Chang, who spends the academic year teaching at what's called a Hispanic Serving Institution, which is just any college that is like at least 28%, I think, Hispanic identified. And Cal State Bakersfield, where he teaches, is I think 60% Latinx, and so he's traveling from there, and then now he's returning back to the BARD MFA program for the first time since the pandemic. So he talks about the differences between teaching at these two different institutions, and how he has to modulate or calibrate his approaches and his way of presenting art to these various students. And he also was part of the largest faculty strike in US history just a few months ago, because the Cal State faculty all just committed to a really, really massive walkout in the wake of a lot of different labor strikes in California and beyond. And it only lasted one day. It was kind of abortive, but he goes into it in a really important way. And I get so excited about these pieces, and I want people to read them. But I think that they all ask questions beyond just what's good about this school or why should we learn about it. I think arts education encompasses so much more, and that's why it's been so meaningful to see it integrated with so many other pieces of writing and approaches and disciplines in Index. The last thing I will say is that, and this is not a self-plug, but for e-flux education, I was looking around to try to commission more pieces, and I saw this exhibition at a small museum in the Basque Country, also in northern Spain, about arts education in the Basque Country. And I wrote to Anton, and I said, can we review exhibitions? He said, oh, you should go. We should cover this. And I was so grateful that I actually got to go visit, and then I also got to visit. I thought I was pretty clear that I just wanted to review this exhibition, but the people that were hosting and escorting me there said, no, you have to visit this museum, you have to visit this institute, we're going to go to 3 cities. And at first I was like, this is unnecessary, I'm here to focus on this, but I started to realize how connected that arts education is with everything else. It was like this exhibition was just so much about forming an art practice in a region that was really, really politically volatile. They were trying to sort of reject certain conventional modes and lean into modernism, which was a very, very radical thing at the time, at the same moment that the Basque Country was trying to assert their independence from a dictatorship that wasn't letting them speak their own language. So I just started to see how much arts education is baked into the culture there, and how it is, of course, everywhere else. what we teach is, I think, what we believe as a society. And I've just learned so much in this position, and it's so special to see it in print. I really do think that I'm only echoing what everybody else has said, but it conveys a real seriousness about what we publish and wanting it to stay around, and I hope that it does. So, thank you.
All right. I'm Hallie. Nominally, I'm the associate director of e-flux. I wrote something on the train over here. I'm just going to give a little wrap up of the evening. When I joined e-flux, which was a little over 6 years ago, I was a little bit in the dark about the entire enterprise, or maybe I didn't understand quite the myriad tentacles of e-flux. It was all a little bit opaque to me, and I kind of reckon that this is the case for a lot of people, whether they're devotees of the film program or avid readers of criticism or notes, or owners of dog-eared copies of our books. E-flux's breadth can certainly be as overwhelming as its depth, I think, which, I mean, this brick of a publication can attest to. 6 years later, I'm still at times a little bit confounded by what our team manages to pull together, or to pull off together. For that, I would also be remiss tonight if I were to not acknowledge the magnanimous efforts of everyone at e-flux, from our announcements team to our programs team to our web team, everyone in between. A lot of them are here. Thank you. Index, for me, exemplifies a couple of things that I think are quite foundational to e-flux's mission as a whole. Much of this has been touched on by the presenters tonight already. The first of these is a commitment to a form of writing that's current, incisive, often open to the experimental. And this is also, I mean, all aspects of our editorial bend are possible in part because of our positioning as a steadfastly independent publisher, which is something increasingly rare and quite special. The other thing that Index exemplifies for me is this sort of stubborn or frank determination to investigate how we might navigate the quagmire of our these trepidatious times. So in collating all of our commissioned content, Index sort of elucidates the dominant strains of discourse that might generate ways of imagining another world, as much as they sort of illustrate contemporary art and culture. So we're not in any way lifting this curtain of opacity. Don't get excited. But hopefully Index can serve as one way of understanding how the pieces of e-flux's puzzle might be rearranged in a way, one possibility of understanding a functional whole. In any case, I'm going to end our program here. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Kim and the team at DIA. Thanks for coming.